Hi, I'm Juan Estrada from District 5. You will each have 3 minutes to respond to our environment question. There are multiple components. First, San Jose has an adopted riparian setback ordinance and policies for the city's creeks and rivers to protect the natural habitat, reduce flooding hazards, and enable creekside trails. Recently, however, the city approved a large office complex that is inconsistent with the ordinance and policies, and the city itself is also proposing a project that is inconsistent. What are your views on the Riparian Corridor Policy? How would you direct the city to balance the needs of nature and development? Would you direct the city to enforce or modify the setback policy? The second component will be the council pledged to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Natural gas in buildings is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in San Jose. Do you support or oppose the electrification of existing buildings, including changing natural gas appliances to electric appliances? And then third, just a yes or no, do you support sunsetting the exemption that allows gas-powered fuel cells in new buildings? And lastly, yes or no, should San Jose, like other California cities, ban gas-powered leaf blowers? And first up will be Raul Perales.
Thank you, Juan. I am supportive of our Riparian Corridor Policy, and actually I helped to pass that a number of years ago here at the council. I do believe it is a good rule of thumb to govern by, but even still, there are circumstances where I feel we should weigh out the options, especially I think in the downtown core where we need to be flexible. We intend to want to preserve our areas outside of our urban growth boundary, and in doing so, we have goals to densify in our downtown core. And I would not direct us to modify that policy. I do believe it should be followed, but I do believe there are also cases in particular where we may have to override when necessary. In regards to the net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, I am supportive and was supportive of our gas ban on all new construction. And I do support our goals in attempting to transition current gas appliances to electric appliances. I want to make it clear, because I know there has been some misunderstanding, that this is a requirement that the city has put in place. That is not the case. It is a goal. We are attempting to achieve that and encourage people and incentivize people to be able to transition from their gas appliances when they are already at end of life and they're going to be purchasing new ones, when they're doing additions or new builds. And I do support that because it is going to be crucial for us to eliminate our use and our reliance on natural gas and other natural resources if we are going to achieve those net zero goals by 2030. And yes, I do support the sunsetting of the exemption. In fact, I was one of the few original votes that disagreed with that exemption being put in place in the first place. And yes, I do believe that the city of San Jose should ban gas-powered leaf blowers like other cities. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Cindy Chavez.
Thank you. First of all, I think the riparian policies are very important. And I do just want to appreciate Councilmember Perales and other leaders for putting that in place and strengthening it. Obviously, we need to protect for floods and water quality and to protect natural resources. I think one of the challenges with the recent actions is that there's not clear reasoning for deviating from the policy versus when you stay with the policy. And so, it can't be based on a developer. It's got to be based on some clear issues that the council wants to deal with. For example, public safety, and or when you have real and meaningful mitigations, again, that are transparent and that all parties agree can be met. So I think, so in any case, I'm supportive. I wouldn't say that it should be redone. I do think, though, that it needs to be more clear under what circumstances changes would be considered or deviations would be considered. As it relates to electrifying buildings, the county's also adopted REACH codes. I think it's really important that for buildings that are already in place, that we really move to educate people, excite people about the opportunities, help people understand what they are, and that we're thinking a lot about using incentives. We have a lot of folks who are on fixed incomes, and just the thought of this being mandatory is sort of terrifying for them. So I think we need to create a coalition of the willing. And the other is, I think there are a lot of folks who were raised thinking that it was better to cook on gas versus electric. I don't cook well on either, so it doesn't really matter. But I do think even good demonstrations about how to use electric appliances and electric cooking is really going to be more the way we're going to get people excited about this change. And I think incentives are really important when we're changing out appliances. As it relates to sunsetting, I'm very comfortable with that. I think that's really a good idea. And then last, I think the question was around the let me just look at my notes because you sent them to us. Thank you. About California banning the gas-powered leaf blowers. I think that we should do that, but I also want to just honor that these are, most of the times people using them have very, very small businesses. These are a really important part of the way they meet the needs of their families. And so again, I think for small businesses in particular, there should be incentives to allow for an easy transition to a new technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Deb Davis.
Thank you for the questions. We do need to balance nature and development in our downtown core and along our riparian corridors. I do think the city should enforce the setback policy when it can, but we have to acknowledge that there are laws in place that allow development to move forward if the property is deemed undevelopable by the riparian policy, and given those setbacks. And so at that point, it's important for us to work with the applicant on mitigations like bird safe design that would help produce a better product and limit the city's liability for not allowing the development. So I think the mitigations are an important piece of that. In terms of the net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, I supported, and I know it's a little bit controversial even to support the all electric measure for new buildings, but I did support that because I think it's important for us to start making a transition. However, I was the person who raised the alarm about the existing building electrification because the original draft plan did talk about mandates, not about phasing out, but actually about mandates for electric conversion by 2030 for existing buildings, including our homes. But I think to talk about those kinds of mandates for existing homes to make a full shift from gas to electric. One of my other colleagues mentioned the cost for families and seniors, not to mention the cost for mobile home park conversions that has the mobile home park community, both the owners and the residents, very concerned about a requirement for conversions actually putting those mobile home parks out of business and closing mobile home parks. I don't want that to happen. But also, at this time, our electric grid is unfortunately too unreliable and unlikely to be able to handle the additional load from all of our dryers, furnaces, and stoves converting to electric. So I'm concerned about that. That's another reason why I'm actually not in favor of a sunset for the exemption for fuel cells, because the grid is too unreliable at this time, and we don't know, we don't have a timeline for when it is going to be reliable enough for the 24/7 uninterrupted power supply that places like our data centers locally need to keep operating and to stay in business. And we need those businesses in San Jose. And in terms of banning gas-powered leaf blowers like others, I think we should do that, but only if we have a program to help those small landscaping businesses to make that conversion without putting them out of business. I think it's really important to support our small business owners. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Matt Mahan.
Thank you for the questions. On the Riparian Corridor, I support the policy and I don't think that it should be diluted, but I also think that particularly in places like our downtown, particularly on those narrow parcels near the river, we will need the ability as a council, as we have recently done unanimously, to use our judgment to decide when the overall benefit to the community and frankly to the environment, because we know when we put jobs and housing more densely in transit supported areas like downtown San Jose, we actually overall make bigger and more important progress against our climate goals. We need the ability to have some flexibility. Our policies, good policies, provide a framework, they provide guidance, but they aren't an inflexible straitjacket that should always be blindly followed. That's why we're elected, is to be able to have discussions and debates, hear from staff, and exercise our judgment in those cases. On the 2030 carbon neutrality goal, when this came before council last year, I was, I think, the most vocal member, certainly one of the most vocal members of the council in raising the question of how are we going to get there? And I know there is a way to get there, but I want to see the math before we simply sign up for a goal. I think it's a good aspirational goal. It's certainly the target we want to set, but I would like us to be honest with ourselves about the investments that are needed, the policies that will have to take place, and we should push ourselves, but we should be responsible and really think about the impact on the most economically vulnerable members of our community. So that goal is a good one, but I think that we're going to have to phase in new technologies, make infrastructure investments. This is a long game. We're not going to just do it in 5 or 10 years. This is literally a 2 or 3 decade process for humanity, and we want to lead the way, but we should do so in a research-based, data-driven way. And so I do not support the forced conversion of gas appliances in people's homes. I think they should be phased out when they're at the end of their natural lifespan. As for sunsetting the exemption on gas-powered fuel cells, I think that makes sense. I think we ought to set a date out in the future that creates a signal to the marketplace and creates an incentive for them to transition away from using gas to fuel those hydrogen fuel cells and to replace them with renewable sources. But that, again, has to be a gradual process, and we want to support innovation and investment in the energy space because we need it. The truth is, we're not there today with the technologies and infrastructure necessary to fully make this switch. We have a long way to go. So we want to incentivize it, not mandate it, and take our time to do it responsibly. And then finally, on gas-powered leaf blowers, we created a community working group. Thank you.